One day, they just stopped replying. Not to everyone at once. It was gradual. First, the group chats went quiet. Then the birthday calls got shorter. Then the calls stopped altogether. Their messages sat there unread, unanswered, while they stared at the screen and felt nothing. Or maybe they felt too much. It's hard to tell the difference when you're that deep inside it. You've seen this person. Maybe you are this person. You didn't disappear because you stopped caring. You disappeared because something inside you became so exhausted that even the idea of explaining yourself felt like climbing a mountain with no shoes. And so you went quiet. And the quiet felt like the first real breath you'd taken in months. This looks like coldness. It looks like avoidance. It looks, from the outside, like someone who simply doesn't care anymore. But that's not what this is. Not even close. Here's what nobody says out loud. Cutting people off is rarely about anger. It's almost never about hate. Most of the time, it's about survival. It's what a nervous system does when it has been running on empty for so long that connection itself starts to feel like a demand it cannot meet. And you are not broken for being here. You are not cold or cruel or incapable of love. Your brain is doing exactly what brains do when they've been carrying too much for too long. It is protecting you. That matters. Hold on to that. The first thing to understand is that this often begins with exhaustion, not the kind that sleep fixes, but the kind that lives somewhere deeper. Emotional exhaustion. The kind that builds quietly over months, sometimes years, until one day you're staring at a message from someone you genuinely love and you feel absolutely nothing. Not annoyance, not warmth, just a kind of hollow heaviness that makes the idea of responding feel impossible. Some people reach a point where being emotionally available becomes its own full-time job. They've been the person everyone leans on, the one who listens, who shows up, who holds space, and somewhere in the giving, they ran out of something. They didn't stop caring. They just stopped having energy. And when you have nothing left, silence becomes the only honest answer you can offer. This is the first reason people disappear. Not because they hate the people they leave behind, but because they're running on fumes. And connection, real, present, emotionally available connection, requires a fuel they've completely depleted. Then there's something older, something that often goes all the way back to childhood. People who grew up in homes where things were unpredictable, where love felt conditional, where criticism came more often than warmth, where the emotional climate shifted without warning. These people learned something early. They learned that depending on others is dangerous, that needing people leads to disappointment, that the safest version of yourself is the one who needs nothing from anyone. Psychologists call this hyper-independence, but that word makes it sound like a personality trait. It's not. It's a response. It's what a child's nervous system calculates when the people who were supposed to be safe weren't. So they learn to handle everything alone. They learn to shut down before someone else could shut them out. And that lesson doesn't disappear when you grow up. It just gets quieter. It runs underneath everything, this low hum that says, don't need too much, don't lean too hard, don't let anyone get close enough to leave a mark. So when life gets heavy, the instinct isn't to reach out, it's to close the door. But here's the part nobody tells you. The emotional numbness that follows isn't peace. It feels like peace at first, the silence, the empty calendar, the notifications turned off. It feels like finally exhaling. But what's actually happening is something the nervous system does when it's been overwhelmed for too long. It stops responding, not just to the things that hurt, but to everything. You start watching your phone ring without moving. You start ignoring messages from people you genuinely miss. You leave conversations on read, not because you don't care, but because something inside you has gone quiet in a way that's hard to explain. Sometimes isolation isn't peace, it's emotional shutdown. The brain, in its attempt to protect you from more pain, from more noise, from more of the emotional labor that left you empty, starts turning down the volume on everything, connection included. And in that state, being alone doesn't feel like loneliness. It feels like the only thing that makes sense. And underneath all of this, often, is betrayal. Not always dramatic betrayal. Sometimes it's the slow accumulation of smaller things. The times you showed up and no one came. The vulnerability you offered that got dropped, or ignored, or used against you. The trust you extended that came back broken. After enough of those moments, the math changes. The brain runs a quiet calculation. The risk of being open is higher than the reward of being close, and so it chooses distance, not out of anger, out of self-preservation. Trust becomes exhausting when it keeps costing you something. Vulnerability starts to feel like a wound you keep opening, and so you stop, you pull back, you create space between yourself and everyone else, and you call it protecting yourself, because that's exactly what it is. The people who cut everyone off are not people who gave up on connection. They're people who got hurt enough, often enough, that connection started to feel more like danger than comfort. And then the world keeps asking them to perform. Smile at the party. Respond to the texts. Show up, be present, be okay. So they do it. They fake it for as long as they can, smiling while exhausted, nodding while numb, showing up while something inside them is quietly screaming for silence. People-pleasing fatigue is real. Emotional masking is real. There is a particular kind of depletion that comes from spending years being whoever the room needs you to be, and never not once being asked how you actually are. When the social battery finally dies, it doesn't just go to zero, it goes negative. And at that point, being around people doesn't just drain them, it feels genuinely unbearable. Not because they don't love the people in their lives, but because every interaction requires a performance they no longer have the energy to give. Here is the painful truth about all of this. The loneliest people are often the ones who convinced everyone they wanted to be alone, the ones who went quiet and let people assume they were fine. The ones who disappeared and never explained why, because explanation itself required a kind of openness they had stopped being capable of. They wanted space. They did not want abandonment. There is a loneliness paradox that lives at the center of all of this. The same person who stopped answering texts often lies awake wishing someone would check in. The same person who left every group chat quietly hopes someone notices they're gone. They weren't looking for attention, they were looking for relief. And they couldn't find a way to ask for it, so they disappeared instead and hoped, somewhere underneath all that silence, that someone would still stay anyway. This behavior shifts as people move through life. In their 20s, it often looks like rebellion independence worn like armor. In their 30s, it starts to look like exhaustion. By the time people reach midlife, the isolation that once felt like freedom can start to feel like a cage they built around themselves. So slowly, they didn't notice until they were already inside. The behavior doesn't disappear, it evolves. What once protected them begins to feel like the thing keeping them from the life they actually want. But that recognition, that slow, quiet shift, is its own kind of beginning. Isolation, when it becomes a pattern, starts to feel like home, familiar, predictable, safe in the way that only known things can be safe. It's a blanket pulled tight not because the world is cold, but because you've forgotten what it felt like to be warm without it. The nervous system learns alone is manageable, together is not. And so it keeps choosing the thing it knows, even when part of you wants something different. That's not weakness, that's pattern. That's the brain doing what brains do, returning to what is known, what is survivable, what has worked before. It's not a flaw in you. It's the logic of a system that has been trying this whole time to keep you safe. If you've ever disappeared from everyone without knowing how to explain it, if you've ever watched your phone ring and felt nothing, or left a message unread for days, or quietly removed yourself from people you actually love, you are not cold. You are not broken. You are not someone who is incapable of connection. You are someone whose nervous system learned, somewhere along the way, that distance was safer than closeness. And it made that calculation based on real experiences, real disappointments, real exhaustion, real pain. The silence was never really about not caring. It was about caring so much, for so long, with so little left in reserve, that going quiet felt like the only honest thing left to do. You are not alone in this. Even in the silence, you are not alone.